Hi everyone, Alexa here with the DuvalHomestead.com, and today I'm going to share with you how to make sourdough starter. Sourdough starter is essentially a culture of live bacteria that causes bread to rise. So it is essentially what you would be buying in a yeast packet if you wanted to make homemade bread. This process is basically creating the natural bacteria that's already existent in the grain and letting it grow and feed on more flour and water over time, which creates a really strong culture of bacteria which allows your bread to rise. And it's much easier to digest this type of grain as opposed to a processed grain that has not been fermented, because you are basically fermenting the grain. Many people who cannot tolerate grain very well, which are a lot in our world today, have a much easier time tolerating sourdough because it's been fermented, and that process strips the phytic acid away from the grain, which is what is very hard to digest when you eat grain that has not been fermented. That's also why it's recommended to soak your beans and your oatmeal prior to making them the next day. If you just eat dry oatmeal, then it's going to be a lot harder to digest than if you ate soaked oatmeal. So this is the same idea. Keeping a sourdough starter at your own home is really convenient because if you can't get bread at the store or you run out of bread, you will always have a starter on your counter. Sourdough starter is something that you keep alive. So it is a collection of basically just flour and water, and it's something that you feed over time and it becomes stronger, and you can keep it on your counter and then you can pull it out for times you want to make any bread products like pancakes, English muffins, pizza crust, bread, dinner rolls, you name it. So it's really convenient to have a starter at home because it gives you the option to make bread products from scratch. I know I used to buy bread a couple times a week and I was always really bummed out whenever we would run out of bread, and I never knew it was going to be so easy to keep a sourdough starter. So in this video I'm going to tell you how to make a sourdough starter. Most recipes for bread that requires a rise, such as a loaf of bread, require something called sourdough starter. And this is not something that can be made in a day. Sourdough starter takes about a week to be alive and cultured enough to have the bacteria to rise in a bread. So I'm going to show you and talk you through the process of creating this over a week. Once you have an established starter, you can use starter in any sourdough starter recipe that you find. I'm also sharing this recipe with my friend Shannon, who is sharing her sourdough pancake recipe over on her blog. So I will link that below, and go check out her channel if you haven't already. She does a lot of minimalist living. She's a mom, she's got recipes, lifestyle, a lot of really great organization tips and home stuff too. She's very inspiring for those who want to maintain an organized, clean lifestyle. So the process takes about a week to create a sourdough starter. Don't let that scare you though. There's nothing really scary about it. All you're doing is combining flour and water and letting it sit on your countertop for a week, and you're refeeding it every single day. So I'm going to tell you the steps to do that. So I have my sourdough starter right here. So you're going to want a glass bowl or a large glass mason jar. You don't want to put your starter in plastic because the chemicals in the plastic may interfere with the cultures of the starter, especially under heat. The other thing you're going to want is a wooden spoon to stir your flour and water. Again, try not to use plastic. And then you just want a tea towel that you're going to put over the top. You don't want to put a airtight lid on the top, you just need a tea towel. The process of making sourdough starter is pretty standard. This is not a very hard recipe, it's just a process of adding flour and water. Okay, so on day one, you're going to add 1 cup of flour and about 3/4 cup of filtered water to your glass bowl. You can use any flour. I suggest using a whole wheat or an all-purpose flour. I do suggest using a high-quality flour like an organic or a King Arthur flour because you'll have a better sourdough that way. Cover the bowl with a tea towel and let it sit for 12 to 24 hours. Now, this is where I think people get a little tripped up when it comes to working with sourdough. Know that sourdough grows in the warmth of your environment. So if your house is 75 degrees, it will eat faster than if your house is 65 degrees. So if it's the winter time, you could leave your sourdough out all day and then feed it in 24 hours. But if it's summer, I probably wouldn't wait that long. I will have a post on my blog at theduvalhomestead.com. I will detail every single day what I'm saying here, so don't worry about writing it down. But the idea is you're feeding the starter once per day. On day 2, you're going to take out half of the starter that was in your bowl and discard it. Then you're going to feed it again 1 cup flour and 3/4 cup filtered water. Now, don't be super concerned about these measurements. Some people say half a cup water, some people say equal parts flour and water. I like about 3/4 cup water. You should go for a consistency that's a little thicker than peanut butter, but not runny. So you don't want it to be watery. It's like a pancake batter, so you should be able to scoop it with a spoon. It should be thick, but it shouldn't be watery. You also might want to change the thickness depending on what you're gonna make, but that will take practice down the road when you start making things more often. For now, just go with the recipe and you'll be fine. So again, you'll cover the bowl with a tea towel, let it sit on your counter for 12 to 24 hours. Okay, day 3, you're gonna do the same thing. Discard half of the starter and then add a cup of flour and 3/4 cup to a cup of water. I do suggest using filtered water in this process. If you're not sure how your tap water is, sometimes the minerals in tap water can impact the cultures of the sourdough. So on day 3, you're gonna repeat the process. Remove the half the starter and then add a cup of flour, 3/4 to a cup of filtered water. Now on day 3, it's recommended to start feeding twice per day instead of once. So maybe that means once in the morning and once at night. This is because your starter is becoming more alive now, so it's going to need more food. You also might be wondering why we keep discarding the starter. What you're trying to do here is create a very intense culture of live bacteria. So think of it as when on day 1 you have a very weak starter, day 2 it's getting a little bit stronger. So if you keep adding flour and water, you need to add it in proportion of the amount of starter that you have. So if you didn't discard any, you would have like cups, 10, 20 cups of flour and water, and you don't want that. Now there's nothing wrong with the starter that you're discarding. If you want, you can also use that to make pancakes or tortillas. We do that a lot for discarded starter because you don't need it to rise. So what you're making in this bowl is something that can rise, and it's a very strong culture. When I first made our starter, I just discarded it. I actually didn't know that you could keep using it, but there is nothing wrong with it. You're just getting rid of it because you're trying to create a very concentrated group of live cultures. You kind of just have to get over the fact that you're going to be discarding it. Yes, it might seem wasteful, but you're only doing this one time and then you'll have a nice, strong starter. Okay, on day 4, you're going to repeat the process twice per day. So take out half and then feed 1 cup flour, 3/4 to a cup of filtered water, and you're gonna do that twice. And you should start to see some bubbles in your starter kind of coming to the top. If you don't see the bubbles, don't worry, you just wanna keep going. The starter strength depends on the quality of the flour, quality of your water, and the temperature of your house. For example, if you use all-purpose flour, it usually takes a little longer than a whole wheat flour, but don't worry, just keep going. Day 5, you're gonna do the same thing twice. Discard half, pour 1 cup flour, 3/4 cup to a cup of filtered water, twice in that day as well. In between feedings, don't forget to cover with a tea towel, let it sit. Now at this point, you might have an active ready starter. You know it's done because it's got nice bubbles to the top. When you stir it, new bubbles form, so you can tell that it's active. Now over the years, this starter can last years, it'll become stronger and stronger. So right now you have a baby starter, but it is active, and you know that it's working if it makes bread rise. So you can try out a sourdough bread recipe, try out an English muffin recipe, something that rises, and if it works, then you know that it's working. This was a sourdough starter I made just for this video, and you can see the bubbles already popping up from my existing starter because it was so strong, and it's only been a few minutes. The first time I made a starter, it took me, I think, 7 days to get it to that point. I also know people who have taken 12 to 14 days until their starter looked ready. So don't feel discouraged, just keep going with the twice-a-day feeding until you have that nice, active, bubbly starter. When your starter is done and you're not going to use it, you want to store your starter in the fridge because that temperature is cold enough that the bacteria won't need to eat very much. It can last in the fridge for up to several weeks. Ours doesn't usually stay in there longer than 1 week. If you are leaving the starter out on your counter, I would make sure that you're using it. You'll know your starter is hungry if you have some water on top of the starter or it's very liquidy and you're not seeing any bubbles. That's how you know that the starter is hungry. Okay, and here are some tips that I've learned from working with sourdough starter that might help you out. First, you want to keep your starter in a warm, dry place. A couple ideas for this are in the oven when the oven's not on. So after you are using the oven at night or during the day, turn it off. The oven's usually a pretty dry place and it's usually residually warm from whatever was in there before. Another place we keep it if our house isn't warm enough is right in front of the fireplace. And this is a little hack that I use if I need the starter to grow quickly. So if I forgot to take the starter out and it's noon and I want to make something for dinner that night, I'll put it in front of the fireplace and it grows really fast because of the warmth. Another tip is you're just going to want to be mindful of how much starter you have on hand. If you have a large amount of starter on hand, it's going to require more food to stay alive. And so you should only keep a small amount on hand. I found that keeping 1 to 2 cups on hand is a nice amount for us. But if I'm going to be making something that requires a lot of starter, like a pizza crust, for example, or pancakes, then I'll go ahead and feed it quite a bit because I know I'm going to be using it the next day, which is why I recommend only keeping a small amount of starter on hand. Also, you don't want to keep a huge bowl in your fridge. It takes up a lot of space. So I like to keep our starter in a mason jar. This is the original glass bowl that I used for the starter. I did this when I first got it because it was so easy to stir and easy to see the bubbles. Now I keep it in a mason jar, and I will link both of these in the description box below this video. Another question that I wondered when I first started making sourdough starter was, can you mix flours like all-purpose, whole wheat flour, einkorn flour? And the answer is yes, but they're not all treated equal. And I've learned this especially in the last few months as I have run out of certain flours. So the flour I'm holding in my hand right now, the starter right now, is a mixture of whole wheat and all-purpose flour. Actually, einkorn and all-purpose flour. Whole wheat flour, for example, tends to eat a little bit faster. It's a little heavier than all-purpose. So if you're going to introduce a new flour to your starter, you can do that. Just watch your starter carefully and make sure that it's not getting too hungry. Another tip I have is don't be alarmed if your starter smells funny. This happens when your starter is hungry, especially when you've left your starter in the fridge for several days or maybe even a week and you pull it out and it's very watery on top and it kind of smells like nail polish remover. I would have thought the first time, if I didn't know, that the sourdough starter was bad. And it's actually not bad, it's just hungry. So go ahead and just give it a stir and then feed it and you'll see it go back to normal in no time. My last tip for using sourdough starter is to just be gutsy and give everything a try. Anything that you normally make with bread products or anything that you normally buy from the store, just try to make it with sourdough. It's so much healthier for you to ferment the grain. You'll feel better when you eat the grain that's been fermented versus the processed non-fermented grain. So give it a try. If you're gonna go through the effort of making a starter and keeping it on hand, you're gonna wanna use it a lot. I encourage you to just pull out a bread recipe and give it a try. It took me several times of making bread and sourdough products to really understand how to use a sourdough, but once I figured it out, I became a lot more comfortable with it, and now I just make up recipes off the top of my head based on how it looks, and I can tell whether or not it's gonna work. So don't be discouraged. Hopefully everything that you do the first time will work out perfectly, but if it doesn't, just keep trying. I promise you'll figure it out. I will also leave some really helpful resources below this video if you want more research and more recipes that you can do with sourdough. And don't forget to stop by my friend Shannon's website for her sourdough pancake recipe. I cannot wait to see it. It looks delicious, and we will definitely be trying that. One of the favorite things that we do is we like to make butter at our homestead, and so I take the buttermilk from making butter and I mix it with the sourdough starter to make a buttermilk sourdough pancake, and that is what we have. I want to say once a week, but the reality is every day because I make it once a week and then I make extra and then we have leftovers throughout the week, so it's kind of a daily food in our home. Alright, well thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any questions about sourdough starter, feel free to leave them in the comments below and I will try to answer them. Have fun with your starter, and if you do make a starter, please tag me on Instagram or Facebook so I can see it. If you're new to my page, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Every week I post farm-to-table eating, homestead living, and our homemade natural lifestyle from our homestead here in Duval. Thanks so much for stopping by the homestead.